Hey folks, how familiar are you with Find Familiar?
Learn about the spell, new ways to use your familiar, and brand new options tonight.
That's how we roll. 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 Welcome to the Goblin's Corner. My name is Eric.
And I'm Matt.
And tonight,
we're rethinking familiars.
That's right. Tonight we're going to talk about the Find Familiar spell, an oldie but goodie in D&D.
Yes.
And we're going to talk to you about how to use familiars properly in your game, which, guess what? There's a lot of really cool ways you can use familiar that you're not using.
Most likely.
And we've got a bunch of really awesome options, both thematically and mechanically, on how to get the most out of your familiars.
This is something I feel very strongly about. I love some of the ways that familiars are handled this edition, and I'm a little on some of the other ways.
So we're going to give it a little bit more flavor tonight. And you know how we are. We're going to Flavor Town.
Absolutely.
We got role-playing options as well. I forgot to mention that. Buckle in, folks. This is going to be a fun ride. Let's get us started off. Why are we talking about familiars, Matt? You kind of mentioned a little bit of it.
I did. The premise of the spell and concept are both cool, but the execution is a little soft.
Yeah, and in fact, there's kind of a running joke in Order of the Stick about how everybody forgets their familiar because it just kind of appears when they remember it.
Right.
And then it just disappears to the point where they actually made the spell able to dismiss the familiar.
Sure.
And because nobody thinks to use it.
Which is a shame.
It is a shame. And so tonight, we'll show you how to use it a lot better. There are lots of ways to get more stuff out of your familiar, whether it's role-playing that you're looking for, whether it's just mechanics like having it do things.
But also we're going to present some ideas to make familiars better both mechanically and thematically.
Finally, we're going to provide a few more options for your familiar so that you can actually, I don't know, make it more interesting.
Right.
You don't just have to have a bat.
Squeak.
Yeah, I mean, you can have a bat, but how about a bat from, say, the Far Realm, folks?
Sure.
Yeah, it's a bat with tentacles. It's a Batman. That's what it is.
A tiny little Batman.
That would be awesome.
Like a miniature werebat.
It looks like a little Lego Batman just sitting on your shoulder.
Sure.
That'd be awesome. I'd love that. Matt, let's talk about Find Familiar, the spell from D&D. What's a familiar in general?
Familiars are spirits called into a physical form to serve their spellcaster. Specifically wizards, but after Tasha's, basically like warlocks and druids get in on the action.
Yeah, which is kind of cool as well. I'd love to see a druid with the familiar.
They absolutely should have one.
They absolutely should. In 5e, that's through the use of the Find Familiar spell. So let's talk about the spell real quick. We're going to sum it up, and there's a lot of really interesting points that, you know, even I, who have played Wizard a lot.
Well, you've got a lot of editions worth of finding familiars to sort through when you're trying to remember things.
Absolutely true. So let's go through this spell real quick, because this is almost an entire feature for the Wizard class.
Sure.
As per the Player's Handbook, you gain the service of a familiar, a spirit that takes an animal form you choose, and the forms can be bat, cat, crab, frog, or toad, hawk, lizard, octopus, owl, poisonous snake, fish, which is a quipper. You know
Sure.
what a quipper is?
Yeah.
I don't.
Oh, they're just tiny little,
Like
they're
a minnow?
almost like minnows, yeah.
Okay. A rat, a raven, a seahorse. Okay.
For reasons.
Spider or weasel. Okay, cool. So it takes an animal form.
Sure.
And they're all CR0 animals, by the way.
Right.
The familiar has the statistics of the chosen form, though it is a celestial, fey, or fiend of your choice instead of a beast. This is very important, and we'll get to why it's important later when we customize.
It acts independently of you, but always obeys your commands.
Again, very important.
Yes, very.
Because you can give it a command. It's not going to be exact. It will be according to, say, the spirit itself.
Right. But also, what's it doing when it's not actively being commanded?
That's a good point. It depends, I guess, on whether it's a fiend or a celestial, huh?
Sure.
It rolls its own initiative, which I rarely use.
Right.
I generally just have the familiar go on the character's turn as a DM. Why? Because math. And when you're playing
it's one less thing to keep track
when
of.
you're playing with 5, 6 people and you've got 10 enemies in a battle, that's a lot of rolls, and it's just way too much. So, but you can totally use your own initiative if you want.
Absolutely. In a smaller group, it's far less of an issue.
Yes.
Also, it specifically states that familiars cannot attack, but it can take other actions as normal.
Don't worry, folks. We've got a workaround for this.
But also, I feel like it's super important that people understand it can take other actions as normal.
Yes. And there's lots of different actions that aren't attacks.
So many actions
that are really super useful in combat. One thing of note is it can deliver touch spells. Very handy.
Very. Even if that touch spell is technically an attack, which we're going to ignore that.
Yeah.
You can communicate telepathically if you are within 100 feet of your familiar.
Very useful as well.
Sure.
You can also use their senses in that range and gain their special senses. So if you're a bat, you could get like blind sense, right? Because he squeaks.
Yep.
But you are blind and deaf on your own body.
You can also get dark vision.
Yes.
Which, if you have a tiny creature, you just sit it on your head
and now
go about your business.
Now you have dark vision.
Yep.
Congratulations. You're a wizard. Oh, you were a human wizard. You didn't have dark vision? You do now. You got Find Familiar, Chief. Easy to use, right? You can dismiss your familiar and send it to a pocket dimension. You can do this temporarily, have it there, and whenever you feel like calling it back, you can. Or you can just dismiss the whole thing forever.
Sure.
And recast the spell.
I have ways of handling that may be a little different, but we'll get into that in a little bit.
Now, you can also cause it to reappear within 30 feet of you as well.
Which is also useful.
For lots of different reasons, which we'll get to in a moment.
Like delivering touch attack spells.
Interestingly enough, or stealing something from somebody's pocket. I don't know, delivering a syringe of, say, poison, slipping it into their cup.
There's lots of good things. Like I said, we're going to get into it.
Yeah.
When it dies, in quotation marks, it disappears being a spirit, and you can cast it again and choose a different form and spirit stat.
Yes. Lots of people who play wizards don't ever change the form of their spirit. They're like, I got a raven, I'm going to play a raven, and it's a celestial raven. This is what it is. Although there's times when I might need a lizard to spy on somebody and have it kind of stick underneath the table and listen in on stuff.
Sure.
And it, because it's kind of sneaky, maybe it needs to be a fiend this time.
Could be.
Could be. So think about that, folks.
Also, specifically, you can only get one familiar at a time.
So sad.
I would argue if it were up to me and somebody were really, really intent on it, I would say you get one familiar per source at a time. What
do we mean by that?
So if you've got wizard levels and warlock levels,
you get two familiars?
You'll get two familiars.
I love that.
Like if you go Pact of the Chain because you love familiars that much, if you take a dip into wizard specifically so you can get a second familiar,
you should be a familiar master.
Yep, you're going to get a second familiar.
And you know what? I would take a dip into druid as well so I get a third familiar. I just have a whole bunch of animals just hanging out.
Yeah.
Why not? You know what? I would totally allow that because flavor-wise, that's awesome. Mechanically, it's a first-level spell.
Yeah.
Not really a big deal.
Your imp rides around on your cat.
Yes. He's got a cowboy hat.
Sure.
The cat's got...
like your picture of the cat.
Exactly like the picture of my cat. Folks, if you're listening to it on Spotify or iTunes or whatnot, you don't see it, but behind me is a cat riding a dinosaur.
Right. With a cowboy hat.
With a cowboy hat. Now imagine an imp riding that cat. But the imp has a cowboy hat, and he definitely has, what are they, the leathers, the riding leathers?
Chaps.
He's got chaps with spurs. He spurs the cat, and the cat belches fire.
Sure.
Thematic fire. Don't worry. or actual fire. It might be a fiend cat.
Right.
It'd be fun.
It could also deliver spells. It could literally be belching fire.
Oh, well, that's using your familiar properly. Speaking of which, let's talk about using familiars properly. As we mentioned before, this spell is so good that many consider this to be a wizard class feature.
And in some ways, I feel like it is.
Yes.
The ability to use it is very much wizard-centric. However, most people forget about theirs, or they treat it just like a lap kitty, right? And don't utilize it.
And in fact, here's the typical scenario for Find Familiar. They go, I got to find familiar, send it into the dungeon and have it come back and tell me what it sees. Okay, the animal has limited intelligence.
Sure.
So it's going to come back and tell you what it sees, and then you run into the traps anyway.
Right.
We've got way better ways to utilize Find Familiar.
Sure.
And in fact, Here are some examples. Matt, start us off. What do we got?
Scouting and reconnaissance should be a no-brainer for most people. It's going to be a great spy, and it can also spy on conversations using its senses.
Yes.
You can sit 100 feet away and run your little lizard into the bar next door and listen to everything that's going on.
Because nobody's going to expect an animal on the wall.
Right.
Here's a good example. A dog or a cat in a city.
It's just a stray.
You're in an alley, and now you're listening to the thief talk about his plans for the heist.
That you've been hired to stop.
Yeah, absolutely. How cool is that? And that's just one example. Or as you mentioned, be a pigeon.
Who sees a pigeon?
Nobody sees pigeons unless they're pooping everywhere. You can also have it interact with the environment. So it can open doors. It can set off traps. And why not? It's a spirit. If it dies, you just resummon it. Not a morally good use for the spirit, but hey.
It may or may not be. That could have been a conversation you had with the spirit when you summoned it.
That's a good point. Yeah. That's a really interesting thing. Interaction.
It's a good chance for role play.
Yes.
It can also act as a communication relay. It can't necessarily talk, but it can deliver notes. Now, if you've summoned a raven, or if you prefer to reflavor it as a parrot, it can in fact talk.
Yes. But if it can't, here's a good example. You have a rat, and it sneaks a message in between the dungeon cells because you guys are both locked up.
Sure.
For some reason, maybe you're infiltrating the dungeon or something like that. That's really cool. And then, of course, you can telepathically communicate with it.
Right.
You can have it carry and retrieve small objects, so not just notes. You can have it, for example, carry illicit objects like drugs or poisons. You want to slip something into somebody's drink? This is the way to do it.
Tiny little vial strapped to a tiny little spider just bobbling its way across.
That would be awesome. Yeah, that's a lot of fun.
Also, it can fetch spell components for you. Potentially, they could hunt for components in an area.
Yeah, if you tell it what to look for, it can go get you spell components. Again, let's say the wizard gets knocked out. He's trapped by goblins. They've taken all spell components. Can't cast spells, right? That sucks.
Yeah.
Probably going to die, except he's got a familiar. Familiar goes out and go get me some bat guano.
Exactly.
Now I can cast fireball once again, and I cook the goblins.
Since it can stay in communication with the familiar, and because you can use its senses, you don't have to send the familiar to fetch them. You can ride with the familiar to get them.
You can also have the familiar aid in social situations. Animals are cute. This would be a great way to kind of get in on a social action. You can also use it to distract a person or deceive a person.
Sure.
Maybe you have your familiar as a dog, a fluffy little golden retriever, roll up, and the guard's like, oh, look at this, because the dog rolls over, wants to pet it on the belly.
Just being cute.
And the thief sneaks in. So does the wizard.
Taking that into account, you can use a familiar to assist in skill checks just in general.
Yes, it can take the aid action.
Right.
You can also have it assist in combat, either through, as we mentioned, spell delivery or carrying a bomb.
Yeah.
That, by the way, is not an attack.
It is not.
You don't have to aim. You just drop the vial of alchemist fire. A falcon can carry a bottle of alchemist fire.
Absolutely.
And just drop.
Strafing run.
Sure.
Makes perfect sense.
Or a bag of caltrops or a bag of ball bearings, our favorite mundane item.
And once again, that is not an attack. Also, you could, as an action, have your little furry critter feed a potion to someone.
Mm-hmm.
That is a non-attack action.
You imagine a cute little rat with a potion around its neck, and he just kind of uncorks the vial, gives it to the paladin. Paladin's saved.
Exactly. Rats have fingers, and they can use them.
100%. You can use them for protection and alarms. You can have the owl take the first watch.
Sure.
Now everybody gets to sleep.
Yep.
And it's even better because your familiar is awake and looking around at stuff, and they have a better perception check than the wizard that's eyes have been strained from years of looking at books.
Sure.
He can just, without even getting up out of bed, transfer his visual information to the owl and look and see what's going on and be like, it's just a deer, and go back to sleep.
All of the familiars have special abilities of some sort. Some of them can fly or have camouflage or can breathe underwater, right? They all have something to offer that a smart wizard should take advantage of.
Yeah. Utilize their special abilities. Speaking of other things that are special, we have what this evening, Matt?
It's time for the question of the week.
Okay. Is it a familiar related question?
It is. I try to keep it on theme.
I love it. What's the familiar related question this week?
What type of minor spirit, right, fiend, celestial, what have you, would you pick, and what would the everyday shape of that familiar be?
What kind of spirits can I choose from? Just the 3 standards or the new ones we're talking about?
I don't like the 3 standards, so just
all right,
go wild.
Cool. So I'm going to choose a chaos spirit, so a creature from
something from Limbo.
Something from Limbo, and it's going to be a black cat. It's a chaos cat.
Sure.
And the chaos cat, here's the weird thematic about this cat. It constantly changes its form. It's always a black cat, but it's going to have variations of the black cat. So maybe one paw might be white, and then that an hour later it's shifted to its left hand, or
like the black on black bangles.
Yeah, or it just basically it randomly shifts through the multiverse from every different type of black cat there is.
Nice.
So it might even have, I don't know, one of its eyes might be missing. It might look like an alley cat.
Sure. Or the dichromatism.
Sure. Yeah. It's
a polydactyl cat.
It might be a polydactyl
Sure.
cat, a Hemingway cat. Yeah, it could be all of that. I just like that idea of this just weird ass cat, and when you stare at it, just like, God, this thing is mad. Just mad as a hatter.
Yeah. You can see it in its ever color changing eyes.
It meows at you, and you're like, that's not all there. It's seen the deep
It's
paisley.
all somewhere.
It's seen the deep paisley. It's got paisley eyes.
Sure.
Yeah. What about you? What would you have for your familiar, and what kind of spirit would it be?
That's a great question. There is part of me that would just say Fae, right? Like
That's an oldie but goodie.
And I like the idea of maybe a squirrel, but whose color patterns are just wrong. Like every time I summon it, it comes up and it's a red squirrel, but it's got like green tips on its fur and feet, or on its tail and feet, or, just things that are almost correct.
It's just like one shade off of what it should be.
But it's not like the shade off that everybody's like, oh, right? Like that's the Cheshire cat. It's purple and blue. No. It's obvious that the shade is wrong, but not so obvious that if you told someone it was a brown squirrel, people would be like, yeah, it's a brown squirrel, man.
I also think the squirrel should never blink. It just stares at you. And that would just to unnerve people. Something wrong with that squirrel, man. That squirrel's messed up.
Or it's doing like the proper cursing you out that every squirrel does if you get too close to a tree.
Yeah, I like that.
Chitters and shakes its little fist at you.
That'd be delightful for role-playing. Of course, we're always interested in your answer to the question of the week, and if you have one, hit us up at Goblin's Corner on all the various socials. And hey, if you're part of the 40% that haven't subscribed yet, do so.
Also, you can feel free to comment down below. That is what the comment section is for.
Yeah, join the club. It's fun.
Yeah.
We answer a lot of the questions you guys have.
It's true. And also, I come up with these questions most often, and I like knowing where other people's heads are at. That's why we ask.
We like to talk. That's really what it comes down to, is we like to talk.
You can't tell by the fact we've been doing a talk show for 3 years.
That's a good point, yeah. All right, so we've kind of gone over the Find Familiar spell. We've given you some proper ways to use your Find Familiar, and now we're going to talk about some options that we have come up with that will make it even better for you in your game. We have 3 different types of mechanical options,
flavor options,
and finally, role-playing options.
Right.
So let's get to the mechanical options first. What's the first thing?
You should add alternate ways to access a familiar.
Okay, let's explain this a little bit more. What do we mean by this?
It is a spell, but you could also grant a player a familiar through a pact of some kind, right? Because they are small spirits.
So you could, through role play, have a pact with it, or through the Warlock class.
Sure.
You could also do it through an object. I'm looking at you, Dritz Jordan.
Right, because yes, it was not a familiar, but also, yes, it very much was.
Yeah, it's pretty much familiar.
And, just role playing, right? You don't have to pay something 1,000 gold or use a ritual. If you come across something that is a minor spirit by its nature, Talk to it.
You're in the Feywild. You come across a CR0 animal in the Feywild. You make a pact with it in the Feywild. You guys leave the Feywild. It leaves with you.
It is a familiar by definition.
Yep.
It is a minor spirit from another plane.
Mechanically, works the same, right? If it dies, well, you got to have a way to get it back. But aside from that,
yeah,
works like a spell, right?
Yep.
You could let it attack. Now, this is an easy way to upgrade your Find Familiar. Just let the CR animal attack.
Sure.
I mean, it can already deliver touch attack spells, as Matt mentioned earlier.
I understand that as written, right, it specifically states it cannot attack. Why can you choose a poisonous snake if the snake is not allowed to attack?
You can also choose like a venomous spider and a scorpion.
It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make any sense to me. Like, go ahead and let it attack. It's not going to do a lot of damage. Although you came up with a really interesting option for the poisonous snake before the show, and I love this idea.
If you're not going to let me attack with it, then I'm going to milk it. And I'm just going to collect the poison. Exactly.
And then I'm going to give it to a raven as my next familiar who's going to deposit that venom in somebody's drink.
That's an option. Also, I would let my player fill a glass vial full of nails and venom and just drop it.
And there you go. That's not an attack.
It is not.
DMs are going to hate us.
Hey, good.
Another mechanic option you could use is to make use of dismissing the familiar. Remember, it goes to a pocket dimension, right? How big is that pocket dimension? Never specifies how big it is. Is it big enough for the familiar? Then it's probably big enough for a tiny object that it was carrying.
I would say just the way I would want to run it. If it is attuned to something, it 100% takes it with it.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you could craft a spell that makes a familiar pocket that allows your familiar to drop off things in a dimension.
That would be really good if you had that squirrel, the familiar squirrel, because then it would just hoard stuff, or a weasel. Weasel's like, that's a ferret. Weasels are
They're very similar.
Yeah, they're similar enough. Have them hoard stuff, and you just kind of reach in there and grab stuff out of random.
Ravens, too. They're anything shiny.
That's an excellent point. Yes. You know what? All of them should be able to collect. Yeah, I had a cat that collected socks. You know what? So might as well have every animal be able to have a pocket dimension.
As we stated earlier, these things have personalities. They will follow your command, but they can do their own actions. So if you leave it uncommanded, it may go pick up shiny stuff because it's bored. It's got nothing else to do. It should.
Yeah, I love that. You could also add mechanical differences depending upon the type of spirit used in the spell. So here's an example. We're going to use Fiend in this example.
Sure.
A Fiend spirit might be immune to poison.
Sure, lots of them are.
Lots of them are. So mechanically, maybe when you summon your familiar and it's a Fiend, it's immune to poison. Now, not a huge deal because remember, it's only got like a couple of hit points anyway, so it's going to pop regardless if it takes damage.
Right.
But thematically, that's really cool. And mechanically, that's kind of cool as well. If it's a celestial, on the other hand, maybe it just can stabilize a dying creature. Again, not useful, but when you need that, very, very useful.
Now, because they can do actions that aren't attacks, they can try to stabilize anyway. Maybe the celestial automatically
stabilizes. That's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it should be something small because it's a CR0 animal, but flavor specific to the spirit.
Sure.
And DMs, come up with something interesting in your world.
Have fun with it.
Yes. Well, finally, mechanically, you could do what, Matt?
This is going to be maybe a little contentious. Create an improved familiar spell or set of spells.
Yes. Specifically, I was thinking of just increasing the CR rating. So, again, Find Familiar CR0, right? Maybe the improved Find Familiar is, I don't know, like a 4th level spell, CR1. So you could summon whatever CR1 animal and CR1 spirit that could be.
If your players are super invested, right, you could have 1/4 as a 2nd level spell, 1/2 as a 3rd level spell, and then the CR1 as the 4th. Like you could step it up to that point.
I'd be fine with that.
After that, you need to spread it out a little bit because the more powerful you allow it to be, the more pressure it can apply to situations.
Yeah, but the point is that this opens up a lot of role-playing experiences, which is what we're here for, folks. Mechanically, this is also really cool because this makes a spell, it could be the same spell, but maybe it just improves as your wizard improves as well.
Sure.
And that would be a lot of fun. I think this would be really cool just overall.
I agree.
Now let's talk about some flavor options, Matt. We're all about that flavor.
Yes, indeed.
So what have we got for flavor for tonight?
First and foremost, we both agree that you should be able to use any CR0 option for a beast shape.
And in fact, there's a lot of them that some of the other books have come up with. We're just going to list these off. So the Monster Manual also has a badger, a scorpion, a baboon, eagle, giant fire beetle,
Which would be cool.
Right? A big old beetle on my shoulder, a jackal,
Mm-hmm.
and an awakened rat.
The awakened rat, I have some issues with.
Yeah, because it's intelligent.
Because it has the potential to be every bit as intelligent as the wizard.
It's a cranium rat, folks.
That's
really what
straight
it
up
is. It's a cranium rat. But still.
Icewind Dale has a hare,
Mhm.
a fox, a chimeric
Creature.
creature,
So baboon, cat,
fox, hare,
Yeah.
rat, weasel,
bunch
whatever.
of those. Waterdeep's got a falcon and an awakened rat again.
I feel like they're pushing this.
They got an agenda.
The Tomb of Annihilation has a wild dog, an owl mirage, which should have been an option from early
A
on,
giant snow bunny.
a unicorn horned snow bunny,
Oh, that's right. What a cool familiar that would be.
a flying monkey.
And why not?
I do think it should be one of the smaller monkeys, personally, but
That's fine. And finally, Storm King's Thunder has a tressum, which is winged cat, folks.
I have a problem with the Tressum for the same reason I have a problem with the awakened cat. They're intelligent creatures.
That's fine. And then a sheep.
That is so ridiculous, but so awesome.
I would love to play a wizard with a sheep.
Yeah. Why did you pick a sheep? That's fluffy, man.
Well, that brings up an
My
interesting
travel
point.
pillow.
No, that brings up a really interesting point. Can you shear the sheep and make wool out of it?
Considering
Spirit wool?
how much it costs to summon a familiar, I'm fine with it.
Spirit wool. Think
Sure.
about that. That would be wool that could be touched by spirits. Could be armor.
A padded gambeson
Yes.
that works against ghosts.
That would be great. Again, these are all thematic options. They're not mechanically really powerful. They're just fun.
Right.
Here's another flavor option. Whenever you have a spirit taking the form of an animal, it should have some visual cue of what type of spirit is taking that form. So
100%.
we mentioned this when we were doing our question of the week, right? So again, if it's a fiend, maybe if it's a kitten, it's an orange and black kitten with burning eyes.
Right. It should have, because it's fiendish, it should have some visual cue to suggest that it's fiendish.
It's a devil kitty. It's a mean-looking kitty.
Right. But, a little bit, it could leave little ashen footprints everywhere it goes. That would be cool.
That kitty's not around, man.
Nope.
That kitty's about to kill you.
But also, not only should it have physical cues, it should also have behavioral cues.
Oh, absolutely.
Based off of the spirit.
So we'll give another example. That fiend kitty is way different than the celestial kitty.
Absolutely. Because as I've reiterated a couple of times, they act on their own
Yes.
when not being given commands.
So the fey kitty is collecting just random things that interest it.
Yeah, anything it finds
The
interesting.
fiend kitty is collecting body parts, eyes, pieces of ears, things it can gnaw off.
Fiend kitties are the knocking crap off of the the edge of the table cats.
Yes.
100%.
I totally agree. Yes. Your familiar is a spirit. Keep this in mind. It is a spirit taking the form of an animal. It could have a base form instead of the animal form. I love this idea, Matt. Matt came up with this. It's great.
This is something that I really like the idea of. For like a celestial, the least celestial that we have in the Monster Manual is the Lantern Archon.
Mhm.
What if, because it's a baby spirit, it's a Candle Archon?
So instead of a lantern archon, it's a
It's
candle.
just a little floating candle.
So a little floating. I mean, again, realistically, not any different than, say, a flying bat.
Right.
The only difference is it's a little candle. Now, it would probably illuminate something.
Sure, but give it the same illumination as a candle.
Okay. That's a cool
What is
little.
that, 5 foot?
Yeah, it's great.
And that's hardly overpowered.
Could also even have a multi-winged dove, which also exists
Kind of thematically appropriate.
We've got a couple other ones. For the fiend, a tiny wretch, so a little soul maggot. You imagine this necromancer with a big old maggot on his shoulder.
Sure.
Yeah, or a green jeweled fly, like an oversized, big ass fly.
That would be cool.
Yeah, it's got a Zagnut in his hand. That's a Beetlejuice reference.
I gotcha. If it's a fae, you could go with like the little ball of light with insect wings.
Sure.
Right? Just classic like cartoon fairy. This I love. This is one of my favorite ideas. A little baby treant sapling, right? Just a tiny little.
I am Groot.
Just a big guy.
Yeah, he should be in a pot.
See, I actually wasn't thinking of Groot when I wrote it down. I was thinking of like a little sprig.
Oh, yeah. I'm down with that too, man. Yeah, again, mechanically, not really a big deal, right? This is all thematics. Finally, you could expand on the types of spirits find familiar summons. So You should. We got celestial, fae for some reason, and fiend, right? Cool.
One of my biggest pet peeves are two types that they missed off rip. One, elemental spirits.
Earth, air, fire, water.
These originally started with wizards.
Yes.
And you didn't give them an elemental option.
A tiny little fire. And remember, it's not like it's a burning fire. But imagine a cat or a raven with fiery eyes.
Now, see, I was thinking like when we were talking about it has its own form.
Mm-hmm.
Like for a fire one, it would be a little piece of coal whose head is on fire.
Oh, nice.
And his little nothing power, right? Flavor power that you give him is the ability to set things on fire. Like
it'd be awesome is if you have a wizard that smokes, it's a cigarette. It's just a cigarette.
Oh, see, I like the idea of him being a little coal golem, basically, and like running across and lighting his pipe and then running back.
That would be awesome too, yeah. You could also do quasi or para elementals because why not? A little mote of dust on somebody's shoulder.
A lightning bug.
Yes, a lightning bug would be awesome. If it was earth elemental, it could be a little chip off the old block. Got a chip on your shoulder, man? Yeah. Chaos and order. Again, 2 planes we talk about, modrons and slods.
Sure.
Can you imagine a tiny little modron?
Tiny little clockwork familiars.
Yes. You know what I was thinking is Batteries Not Included, the movie?
Sure.
Something like that.
Absolutely.
And of course, a tiny little slod. It's a tiny little slod. It's Mr. Toad, man. Everybody loves Mr. Toad.
It's just a little more bipedal than normal. Something from the Shadow Realm.
Yes, or the ethereal plane.
Sure. You already got one of the transitive planes.
Might as well get the other 2, right? You could have something, speaking of which, from the far realm.
I love the idea of some weird little thing.
I think this would be cool. It could be like a tentacle or something. That's obvious. But what if your familiar is like a growth, like a cancer on your hand or on your arm?
You could do that. I also like the idea of little miniature versions of what about a squirrel illithid?
Yes. So it's an animal, but there's just something a little hard about it.
Yeah, you take your aberrations, which normally come from the far realm, and you take that and you put it on something normalish.
The rat has an ear on it.
Sure.
Or something weird like that. It opens its mouth and its head kind of splits sideways instead of up and down.
Sure.
Yeah, it's just something ridiculous like that. You could have an undead spirit. That would be cool. Have a skeletal cat. You know what? Your necromancer should totally have a skeleton cat.
This is the second one that irritates me, wasn't on the list. There is a wizard subclass specifically dedicated to dead things, and there's not undead familiars. That is dumb.
That's wrong.
I don't like it.
And then finally, you could just have any CR0 monster.
Yeah.
Now, again, just have it take the form. You don't need the special abilities. Just something, again, thematically interesting. So, for example, maybe a tiny little eye tyrant. It's just an eyeball that floats.
Yes.
It doesn't shoot laser beams or anything like that. Just a little eyeball. Or a baby slime.
I love the idea of a baby slime.
You keep them in a vial. Have them flow under the doors. That'd be great. I also love the idea, and folks, this is ridiculous, but
yeah, this we understand that this is comedy.
A dragon egg.
Yes.
It's just a dragon egg. It doesn't move. Every now and then it might.
What if it does like the oblong roll?
It screams obscenities in Draconic at you through the shell. That's what it does. Hilarious.
Sure.
That would be great for a Draconic sorcerer. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And at some point through roleplay, that egg is hatching.
What if it hatches very, very, very slowly, like in cartoon fashion? First, the two little eggs pop out, and it stays just
like in Looney Tunes, where this egg just walking around. That's awesome. As we mentioned, finally, you can also do some role-playing options. These, I would definitely say, try to incorporate these as a DM. Role-playing is always the best way to add flavor to minor things.
100%.
As a storyteller, you can and should play up on the relationship with the spirit being summoned.
Right.
We mentioned this earlier, but it should be noted.
From my perspective, as it's basically kind of written, this is the baby version of planner binding.
Because you're making a
pact with a spirit from another place.
Yeah.
So what does the spirit get out of this deal is the question I've always asked. My premise is this is a way for minor spirits to stick around long enough in the prime material to gain power and experience with other planes.
Yeah, because they're wanting to accumulate knowledge because knowledge is power on the planes.
Right.
So the more you know about the material plane or any other plane that your adventuring wizard is going to, the more powerful you get because you can trade that information for power or favors or whatever.
But also power has a physical manifestation in realms where ideas are literally manifest.
This makes Find Familiar, the spell, and the relationship with the spirit way more compelling in terms of gameplay. Mechanically, nothing has changed.
Right. But this is a deal.
Yeah. And that means a lot.
Yeah. I love that premise because I feel like it's kind of ignored that these are spirits.
I agree. Another thing you could do is to consider what happens when you resummon the same spirit. So if you call the same spirit back, if it popped, do you summon the same spirit or do you summon a completely different spirit? Now, obviously, if you're going from fiend to celestial, that's a different spirit.
Clearly.
But if I summon the same spirit over and over, I'm summoning my fiendish kitten, my fiendish kitten, my fiendish kitten. Is it the same one?
The way I've always planned it is, unless you, the player, tell me you're summoning a different spirit, it is easiest to do the same pact over and over with the same minor spirit.
So that's something to consider. Does that mean it learns over time?
Yes.
Think about that as a DM and a storyteller. Additionally, you should be able to do favors to get boons for the spirit through role play. We mentioned this earlier. This is another way to give loot to your players without giving them loot.
Right. It's not a pile of gold.
This is 100% story-driven. This can be used as much or as little as possible as you want as a storyteller. Matt came up with a great idea. Okay, so that means potentially everyone could get a familiar. Now, if the familiar pops, you may not be able to resummon it because if you're a fighter, but
depending on how big of a favor you did somebody, what if you ended up with a summoning circle as a tattoo and you just have to burn the incense on your tattoo
to resummon it
to
again?
Resummon it.
That would be really cool. I also love the idea you came up with earlier as well is imagine walking into town and everybody's got a familiar.
I feel like familiars are a common enough sight that people don't pay attention to any one specifically. But if a group of adventurers, the fighter, the barbarian, the rogue, there's not a wizard in the group.
They all got animal familiars.
But they all have animal familiars. People are going to notice that. That is strange.
And thematically really interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes a really interesting party, and it makes a really interesting use of the spell, a first-level spell. DMs basically make this a less generic spell, is what we're getting at. For all of this, if you've taken anything else tonight, make it less generic. Focus more on the role-playing aspect of this spell.
This is a spirit that you have cut a deal with. It may be a baby one, but it's still a spirit.
So
treat it as such.
Treat it as such. So there you have it. Clever ways that you can use the Find Familiar spell along with a bunch of different role-playing and thematic options as well as some mechanical ones that you can use in your next campaign. You're welcome.
I really feel like that this can add another layer of both fun and interest to your game.
100%. Any questions or comments? Hit us up at Goblin's Corner on all the various socials. Did you enjoy this podcast? We're summoning another one. Subscribe to it on your favorite player, YouTube and Twitch.
Click the 5 stars and give us a review on iTunes, Podchaser, and if you're on YouTube, hit the like and subscribe button. It boosts the show and feeds the hungry algorithm.
We're just currently hiding in a dark corner, encased in all black fur, the tiny kitten of death with glowing red eyes as it collects body parts, mostly fingernails.
I was thinking pinkies.
Pinkies? Yeah. Ooh, scary. That's all the time we have for this week. Once again, my name is Eric.
And I'm Matt.
We'll see you next time.
Good night, folks. The Goblin's Corner has been written and produced by Eric Holden and Matt Stable.
D20 did our music.
And this has been a Subterranean production.
Later.